sermon's titled, I think aptly, I thought you were watching them. I'm going to go in a little bit different direction with this morning. It'll be fairly short. I want to focus really on Mary and Joseph and the way they reacted. I wonder how you and I would have reacted. I've had a time when my children have been lost for a little while. But for 4 days, how would you have reacted? I don't know the answer to that. But what strikes me is this is a pretty normal family. I mean, this is the Son of God, but they're in a crisis. How do Mary and Joseph react, and what are the implications of how they react? Like I say, it's a pretty normal thing. Do they react in great anger? Or do they react by trying to control Jesus? It doesn't seem to be. It seems to be they're like, oh my gosh, what in the world are you doing? It reminds me, and I'll tell you a little bit more about this person. You have no idea who this person is. They were a client or a patient in counseling with me. It was a young woman, not in this area, who came to see me, but her parents were treating her very differently. She had a very, very controlling father. And I'll tell you that story here in just a little bit. Jesus is in this tween stage, right? He's 12 years old. Do you remember when you were about 12? Maybe if you've had children, you remember what your children were like when they were 12. Notice it says Jesus stayed behind. In other words, he knew his parents and family were leaving, but he made a choice to stay behind at the temple. I hate to say it, but Jesus is kind of a stinker. He's a 12-year-old kind of stinker. Are his parents bad parents? No. We're into this nuclear family. Our family is this person. No, this was a whole caravan. At 12 years old, Jesus might have been traveling with the women, but he was almost old enough to travel with the men. Aunts, cousins, nephews, uncles, grandparents, everybody traveling together. No, they weren't bad parents. Jesus was a stinker, and he stayed around in the temple for 3 days, apparently completely unconcerned with what his mother and father must have been thinking. And they come back to get him. I imagine that Mary's words were not just, "Child, why have you treated us like this?" I imagine they were probably a little bit more worried. Maybe there was more said, but parchment was tough to come by. So, we abbreviate what happened. And does Jesus say, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have done this. I feel awful"? No, he says, why are you saying this? You should have known I'd be here. Jesus is kind of this 12-year-old stinker. I think about this too, why did it take them 3 days to find him? Maybe, well, first, shouldn't they have known? I mean, there was the angel Gabriel told Mary, "This is the Son of God." Anna and Simeon prophesied that a sword would pierce her heart, that Jesus would be killed, that he would set people against each other. Why? Maybe, maybe it had been 11 years or so of relative peace. Could they have forgotten that their child was the Son of God? Maybe they didn't want to look at the fact and come to terms with the fact that their baby was growing up. Their little boy was becoming a man. And maybe they just didn't want to reckon with that. Maybe for 3 days, they looked everywhere but the temple. Almost like, I don't want to face that. But find him they did. Did they try to control him or what? No, they just said, "Come with us." And he went with them to Nazareth. And Mary's reaction was that she treasured these moments in her heart. We go back to my patient counseling client. Her father and mother divorced, and she started coming to me because she was really, really anxious. Anxious to the point to where she was getting in wrecks in her car and she couldn't figure out why. She had finally gotten up the courage to leave her controlling father and move about 12 hours away to another city. And her father was pressuring her to find a man. She was in her mid-20s. Find a man and settle down. And find a man in church, not in a bar, which I don't have a problem with. That's great. And she did find a man, a very nice one. And she ended up moving in with the man. It was then that her father started to make 12-hour drives twice a month to come and stay with her and the man. Then he started to stay with the man's parents because he befriended the man's parents. My client started to feel like she had to entertain and come up with things to do on these weekends. It seems like this is the order of things today. You move in together, you have a baby, and then you get married. It was different in my day. Very different. But that's the way they decided to do it. Okay? So they had a baby. On the child's first birthday, they were going to have a little cake in the park. And she told her dad, oh yeah, we're having a little birthday for Billy. His name's not Billy. And we're just going to do something in the park. And he arranged for 15, 16, 18 of the family members to all descend upon their town and stay in hotels and have presents and more cake and more obligations. She was running herself ragged. She was an anxious, neurotic mess. They decided to get married, and her father became more insistent upon seeing her. On their honeymoon, he called her cell phone the next day and suggested that they take a daddy-daughter trip in 2 weeks to California. She has a 1.5-year-old child, she has a job, and she's on her honeymoon. She can't figure out why she's so anxious as her dad comes into town every other weekend. A lot of times our problems, when they're too close, we can't see them. And I started to ask her questions about her father. Like, I wonder if your boundaries with your dad are good. I wonder, is it really appropriate for him to drive 12 hours, get in on Thursdays and stay till Sundays? Is it really up to you to organize activities? You seem to feel responsible for everyone's happiness. She got enraged at me. Her face became red. She yelled at me. She quit coming for a while. And then there was the episode of the beach where she finally came back to see me. Her father decided to have a big family vacation at the beach, and so he invited everyone, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone to come to the beach, and he waited until last to call her and said, guess what, we're all going to the beach. It's a 16-hour drive, pack up the 1.5-year-old and come to the beach, leave your job. And she completely melted down. She didn't go to the beach. Her husband finally said, look, we're fighting all the time. Your dad is a crazy maker. He's mentally ill. And as her counselor, I couldn't say your father's mental illness is causing you mental illness. I had to just ask questions. Then, when she didn't go, the guilt and shame ensued, and then he planned a trip to Hawaii. He conveniently neglected to tell her, and when she said, "Why didn't you invite us?" he said, "Well, you skipped the beach that last time. We figured you didn't want to come." She finally said, "You know what? Enough is enough," and she called his bluff and said, "You're not seeing your grandchild anymore, and we don't want you coming into town anymore until we get this situation straight." My understanding is they're still estranged because he's pouting, still trying to control, and she's got her boundaries erected very firmly. As I start to wrap up here, I know this is a strange story and a strange way to talk about this sermon, but I think this is a model. Mary and Joseph Mary and Joseph could have just decided, let's just don't tell him about the angel. Let's tell him he needs to take over the carpentry business. Don't say anything. It's going to turn out bad, but they didn't. They had to let him go. This is a story for me about letting go, and not just letting go of your children, letting go of people, situations in our life that we need to just say we don't have control over this. We shouldn't try to have control over it, and we've got to let it go. As I start to look at this season, for me, I have been, with the loss of my father suddenly, I've just been trying to process this. And I've gone through periods when I'm real snappy, where the whole world is on my last nerve, where I'm angry, where I'm evaluating him as a human being and as a father, and he's fallen short. And then I look at myself and see where I've fallen short. I've made a decision. I'm not going to forget my dad. I'm not going to forget my grief. I'm going to process it with my spiritual director, and I've decided to let some of this stuff go. This is the brand new start of our Christian year. Maybe we could all think about what are some things that we can think of in our own lives that are keeping us from following our call or keep us from following our star? And what are some things that we can lovingly say, it's time for me to let go? Just a question. Amen.